I've worked night shifts for years, long enough to know that most nights are the same, until suddenly, they're not. That night started like any other. A quiet, the smell of coffee that had been reheated one too many times, and the usual half-empty beds waiting for whatever chaos the city would send us next. I was the physician in charge, and what I'm about to tell you is something I still don't completely understand. At 2:37 a.m., the radio cracked through the silence of the ER. A female voice came in. Tight, rushed, trembling just slightly. Male. Approximately 45 years old, found unresponsive in his car. No pulse, at scene. CPR in progress. Those words hit like static in my brain. We get calls like that all the time. People whose hearts decide to give up somewhere between midnight and dawn. But something in her tone made me straighten up. It wasn't panic. It was hesitation. Like she wasn't sure what she'd just picked up off the ground. The line stayed open longer than usual. I could hear the background noise, sirens, the faint thump of compressions, and a sound I couldn't quite place. A low hum. Almost like wind blowing through a tunnel. I remember thinking, that's strange. The windows in those rigs don't let in sound like that. When the ambulance finally backed into the bay, my team and I were already waiting. The night outside was still, the kind of quiet that only happens between shifts of chaos. But the moment those doors opened, that quiet shattered. They rolled him out fast. A pale man, sweat glistening on his skin, his shirt torn open, chest heaving with each compression. The paramedic on his left was shaking from exhaustion, her gloves slick with sweat. Time of arrest? I asked as we pushed the gurney inside. Approximately 15 minutes ago, she said between breaths. We got him back once. Lost him again on the way. She avoided eye contact when she said it. That's when I noticed it. Her hands were trembling, not from adrenaline, but from something else. Fear. The other medic just whispered. His eyes were open the first time we got a pulse. He said something. What did he say? I asked. He hesitated. He said, don't do it again. I didn't respond. There was no time. We rolled into trauma too. The smell of antiseptic and adrenaline thick in the air. The clock on the wall read 2:48 a.m. The rhythmic beeps of the monitor filled the silence like a fragile heartbeat of their own. Epinephrine, 1 milligram, I ordered. Charging to 200? Clear. The defibrillator pads sizzled as they touched his skin. The shock lifted his body off the table, a violent arc, and then dropped him like a marionette whose strings had been cut. The monitor spiked. Flatline then. 1 beat. Another. Then a rhythm. Got it, the nurse said, her voice catching. Sinus rhythm returning. He was alive, technically, but the second his pulse came back, the air changed. I don't mean metaphorically. It changed. The temperature dropped. You could feel it crawl over your skin like invisible frost. Even the overhead lights flickered once, just enough for everyone in the room to notice. Nobody said a word. We all just stood there for half a second, waiting for the world to make sense again. The monitor kept beeping steadily, but somehow it didn't sound right. There was something off about the pattern, like a faint echo in each tone. And when I leaned in close to check his pupils, I felt it, a wave of cold air rising from him, as if his body was still somewhere else. We stabilized him. Intubated, checked his labs, and watched his numbers climb back toward normal. About 20 minutes later, his vitals looked good enough to start reducing sedation. I've seen hundreds of people wake up after cardiac arrest. Usually, they gasp, choke, flail, instinct taking over. But not this man. When his eyelids fluttered open, he didn't move. He just stared straight at the ceiling, calm, almost peaceful. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, said, "You shouldn't have brought me back." For a moment, nobody breathed. The nurse froze beside me, her gloved hand hovering midair. "Sir," I said carefully, "you went into cardiac arrest." "We had to," he cut me off. "No, you don't understand. I was gone. I was fine. And now, everything's wrong." His tone wasn't angry. It was worse than that. It was disappointed. like we had ruined something sacred. He turned his head slowly toward me then, and for a second I thought I saw something in his eyes. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. We kept him under close observation. Name, Daniel Price. No ID, no wallet, just a cracked phone with a dead battery. He said he'd been driving home from work when he felt tired. That's all he remembered, as I wrote my notes. Trying to piece his story together, he spoke again, softly. But clearly, you have a son, right? About 8 years old? The pen slipped from my hand. I hadn't mentioned my family. Not to him. Not to the nurses. Not to anyone here. How do you know that? I asked, more sharply than I meant to. He turned his head toward me again. Eyes half open, but unnervingly focused. I saw him. When I was gone, standing by a lake. You worry he doesn't remember your face when you're on night shifts. My pulse spiked, because that every word was true. The lake he mentioned was real. A place I used to take my son before the divorce. No one at the hospital knew about it. Before I could respond, the cardiac monitor alarmed, his oxygen dropping fast. Check the tubing. I said. The nurse verified everything. Tubes perfect. Access fine. Ventilator reading normal. Yet the numbers kept falling. 82, 78, I looked at the man. He was calm to calm. Then he smiled faintly and whispered, "They're not letting me stay." Just as suddenly, the monitor corrected itself. Saturation back to 99. The room went quiet again, but the air still felt heavy, like someone else was standing there with us. I remember stepping back, looking at the monitor. The heart rate blipped steadily on the screen, but every few seconds, I thought I saw something. Tiny flickers. Spikes that didn't belong. I blinked. Looked again. Gone. The nurse must have noticed the color draining from my face because she whispered, "Doctor, are you okay?" I nodded. But inside, I wasn't sure of anything anymore, because for the first time in my career, I wasn't convinced the man on that table was truly alive. Later that night, when things calmed down, I went back to check on him. He was awake, just staring at the ceiling again. "I'm sorry," I said. "If you're confused, that's normal after resuscitation. Sometimes people," he smiled faintly. "Doc, you don't believe in anything after this, do you?" I hesitated. "I believe in what I can measure," I said. He nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." Then he whispered, "It's colder here than you remember, isn't it?" "What do you mean?" He looked directly at me. When I came back, something followed me. Over the next few hours, odd things started happening. The cardiac monitor in the next room turned itself on. The lights flickered, though the power grid was stable. And every time I walked past his room, the ECG showed small random spikes, like interference, but only when I was near. The nurse joked that maybe I was haunting the monitor. Daniel just smiled when she said that. He whispered, "It's not him haunting. It's what's behind him." I tried to find his records. Ran his fingerprints, checked police reports. Nothing. No Daniel Price matching his age or description existed in the system. Even the paramedics said his license plate didn't match any registration. It was like he'd appeared out of nowhere when I asked where he lived. He said, "Nowhere anymore." Around 5 a.m., the hospital got quiet, that eerie pre-dawn silence that only night shift workers know. I sat by his bed, and I asked him, "What did you mean when you said you were gone?" He looked tired. "You won't believe me? Try me." He stared into the distance, eyes unfocused. There was light. Not like the movies, not warm, not peaceful. It was endless, like standing inside a thought. I felt everything. Everyone. I knew I wasn't supposed to go back. Then why did you? He looked straight at me. "I didn't. You pulled me." His heart monitor beeped steadily, but my own heart was pounding. He continued, "There's a cost, doctor, for dragging someone across." At 5:12 a.m., his heart stopped again. We rushed in, started compressions, but as soon as I touched his chest, every monitor in the unit went black. Not just his, all of them. Total silence. Then, One by one, they came back online. And for a brief second, every single screen showed the same thing. A flat line. All patients. All rooms. Then, as quickly as it started, everything returned to normal. We looked at each other. Nobody spoke. Daniel gasped, and his pulse returned. But he wasn't the same. He looked at me, terrified. "They're here," he whispered. "They know I'm not supposed to be here." "Who's they?" I asked, but he just started to cry, quietly like a child. That sound still echoes in my head. Moments later, his vitals stabilized again. But the lights in his room dimmed, without anyone touching the switch, and his reflection. I swear I saw it move before he did. At 6:04 a.m., he looked calm again. Not the eerie stillness from before. This was different. There was a strange peace about him, as if the fight inside him had finally settled. The monitor hummed quietly in the background, its beep slow and steady. The faint glow of the sunrise began to creep through the blinds, washing the room in a pale orange hue. It should have felt like hope, but instead, it felt like goodbye. He turned his head toward me. His eyes were clear, alert, even gentle. "Can you promise me something, doctor?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the room like a bell. I nodded, hesitating, sensing the weight of whatever he was about to ask. "When I go again, don't bring me back, please." Those words landed heavy. I'd heard that kind of plea before, from patients with terminal cancer, from those in unbearable pain, from the ones who knew they were at the end, but never from someone who had already crossed over and come back knowing what was on the other side. He looked at me with something that felt almost compassion, like he pitied me. For a moment, I couldn't speak. All the rules, all the training, every instinct in me screamed to keep him alive, no matter what. That's what doctors do. We fight death. We chase it out of rooms, pull people back from its edge, and call that a victory. But looking at him now, I wasn't sure if we'd won anything. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could say a word, he took a deep, slow breath, the kind that feels like it carries a lifetime inside it, and whispered, "Thank you for trying." Then his eyes drifted upward, unfocused, and the monitor flatlined. No alarms. No sudden panic. Just a long, steady tone, like a single note that filled every corner of the room. The nurse turned toward me instinctively, waiting for the order she'd heard 100 times before. "Doctor," I looked at Daniel. He wasn't suffering. He wasn't gasping or struggling. He looked at peace. For the first time in my career, I didn't call the code. Didn't shout for the crash cart. Didn't demand compressions or epinephrine. I just stood there and whispered, "Time of death." 65? The nurse hesitated, unsure. But she wrote it down, and the moment I said it aloud, the moment the words "time of death" left my mouth, the entire room changed. The flickering lights steadied. The faint hum in the walls went silent. That invisible chill that had lingered since his arrival was gone. Everything, the static, the tension, the feeling of being watched, it all just vanished. The monitor powered down with a soft click, as if exhaling. Even the air felt lighter. Normal. I stood there for a long moment, unable to move. Somewhere down the hall, another patient coughed. A nurse laughed softly at a joke. The hospital had gone back to being just a hospital again. But the silence inside trauma, too, felt sacred. Or maybe haunted. I couldn't tell the difference anymore. A few hours later, when the sun was fully up and the day shift had taken over, I went to the security office. I needed to see what had happened, to make sense of it. To prove that it hadn't been some strange hallucination, the security guard was half asleep, sipping stale coffee. I gave him the patient's room number and asked for footage from the night. He nodded and started scrubbing through the timeline. "Strange," he said after a moment. "There's no data from around 2:37. "What do you mean, no data?" I asked. He rewound again, faster this time. The screen showed static. The timestamp flickered to 36, to 37, to 38, and then it just skipped forward, The feed didn't come back until 6:05 a.m. The moment Daniel died, no video. No audio, nothing. Every other camera in the unit worked perfectly that night, just not the one in trauma. 2. It was as if the entire room had been erased from existence for those 3.5 hours. It's like he was never here, the guard muttered. He said it as a joke, but I didn't laugh. Because deep down, I was starting to think he was right. When I finally went back to my locker to change, the corridors were filled with the noise of the waking hospital. Carts rolling, phones ringing, the scent of coffee and disinfectant mixing in the air. The world was normal again, predictable. I unlocked my locker, reached for my coat, and froze. There, lying neatly on top of my folded scrubs, was a small piece of paper, yellowed, wrinkled. I frowned. Nobody had access to that locker but me, not even housekeeping. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded it. The handwriting was shaky, almost childlike, the ink slightly smudged, as if written in a hurry. It said, "Let him sleep. He remembers you too." I stared at the words until they blurred together. Remembers me too. I didn't understand what it meant, not then. But when I got home that morning, my son was waiting at the kitchen table, still in his pajamas, coloring. He looked up at me, smiled, and said, "Daddy, I dreamed about you. You were at the lake with the man you helped." I didn't ask any more questions. I couldn't. That note is still in my wallet today. Sometimes during long shifts, when the monitors start beeping in strange rhythms, or the lights flicker for no reason, I take it out and read it again. It reminds me that medicine can pull people back, but maybe not always from where they're supposed to come back to, and every time. I walk past trauma too. I swear, just for a moment, the air feels colder again, like someone's standing just behind me. Maybe it's him. Maybe it's just my mind, but either way, I never called another code at 6:05 a.m. Since that night, I've had dreams. In one of them, I'm standing by a lake, and my son is there. He looks up at me and says, "Daddy, the man by the water says you're sorry." I always wake up right after that, some nights. When the ER is silent and I hear the faint beep of a monitor in the distance, I still think about Daniel. Maybe he was confused. Maybe it was just coincidence. But sometimes when I walk past trauma too, I feel that same cold air again, and every time it happens, I remember his words, "You shouldn't have brought me back." If you've ever worked in a hospital, you know, there are moments science can't explain. We call them equipment malfunctions, or coincidences. But deep down, we all know there are places medicine isn't supposed to reach. And sometimes we reach anyway. Sometimes, stories like this remind us how fragile the line between life and death really is. If this story gave you chills, or made you think twice about what happens after we're gone, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more true medical mysteries and emotional stories. Every comment, every like helps this channel keep growing and lets me share more of these strange, unforgettable nights from the hospital. Tell me in the comments. Do you think he really came back? Or was it something else that returned? Thanks for watching, and remember, some patients never truly leave.